Hi, welcome to this episode of The Daily. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, last week, the Family First lobby group here in New Zealand released a survey which looked at marriage data and poverty statistics, I think going back to the 1960s. And basically they made the argument that one of the fundamental factors, not the only factor, but one of the fundamental factors in child poverty is the relationship that their parents have. In other words, are they living in an intact two-parent family home? And obviously, when you're making this argument, you're effectively suggesting that marriage is actually quite a good protective mechanism against children experiencing child poverty or just, poverty in general. Now, for some reason, people just went nuts about this. Some people misrepresented what they were saying, which was obviously not fair. Others just kind of couldn't seem to grasp the basic concept of what's being said here. Now, to be fair, whenever you get into statistics around the benefit of marriage, there are always certain factors that you can never pin down accurately. So some people say, because the statistics show us that married people have higher incomes, therefore marriage is a good way to ensure that you have a higher income. In actual fact, it could well be that those people were going to have higher incomes regardless, and that's why they are more marriageable, if you like, and that's why they ended up married. So you can't really pin something like that down. However, when it comes to this question of poverty, there are some basic economics and some basic maths here that actually this argument, there really should be no dispute about this. This is just basic factual information. And it works like this. There's two ways in which this, or three ways actually in which this works. Two of them are direct, one of them is a bit more indirect. So there's the first one. The first one is that when you have a two-parent intact family living in the same household, they have a huge advantage that a solo parent or a broken family living in two separate households doesn't have. They have the ability now to actually earn two incomes in that one household. And that means, generally speaking, they are going to be better off than a family that can only earn one income. Far better off. And when you start factoring in other things like a parent on their own has to weigh up how much time they give to working life plus looking after their children, you see how this becomes even more pronounced. Now, there are some exceptions to this, of course. There are some solo parents who are just highly skilled and in highly skilled professions where they can command extraordinarily high wages, high salary for their work. And so for them, they are better off than a two-parent family. But generally speaking, the average doesn't work that way. Most households are not like that. And so even if you are someone who can earn an extraordinarily high income, you still have to factor in the fact that you now have to pay for childcare and childminding that two parents potentially don't have to pay for or can share between the two of them. So there are other economic factors as well, but even in cases like that, that's not the norm. That's the exception to the norm. Now, the second way in which having an intact two-parent family helps economically is the fact that an intact two-parent family consumes resources a lot more efficiently. So they have a lower cost way of consuming their resources. As soon as you break a family apart and create two separate households, you now have extra resources. You're replicating certain resources, and the way you use certain resources becomes far less efficient. So, for example, two households now have to take two separate trips in cars to the supermarket to go and do the shopping. So what that means is your petrol bill all of a sudden for that family completely changes. More money goes into petrol than before. Going to a sporting match on a Saturday, okay? Unless one parent is going to pick the other parent up and then take them to the sporting match, even then there's extra journeying and extra miles involved in that trip. Most of the time, those two separate parents, if they want to watch a child play sport, are going to have to take two vehicles instead of one, and they're going to have to spend more on petrol to get there. The way we use certain consumable resources changes. In a household, for example, where mum, dad, and the kids all use the printer, the consumables in that printer are shared amongst everyone. But once you break the household apart, you now have to replicate. So you have to actually have two printers, right? If everyone relies on a printer, you have to get two printers. And then you have to have two lots of consumables. Everything starts to change in the way that you consume resources. So that's the second way. And third way is not as direct, but still, I would argue, very, very important. And that's the fact that we know that children who experience family breakdown and marriage breakdown, a large percentage of those children experience trauma and emotional destabilization as a result of that experience. And it takes a lot of care and attention and work to ensure that you protect against the worst excesses of that. But it affects them. I remember once picking up a hitchhiker a couple of years ago on my way back from an event I'd been speaking at. And this guy was from France. He was in his 20s. And his parents had literally just divorced. He was, I think, 27 or something, and his parents had just divorced like 2 years before. And he was still, I asked him how did it make him feel, and he said he was just so broken. His world was just thrown into disarray. 27-year-old man. And he was still thrown into a complete spin because of his parents' divorce. So how much more for younger children are they affected by this? Now, we know it's very clear that divorce does have negative impacts on a lot of children. Now, that means that that's going to have an impact on their schooling, their education, their ability to learn. The more mental resources they have to consume dealing with stress and uncertainty and fear and worry and all those things that go along with divorce, the less mental resources they are committing to their education and to learning. And that's important, because what that means is they are on the back foot and they're going to be hampered. If they don't get their educational priorities in order and sorted out, then when they get out of the education system, they're not going to be, generally speaking, in as good a position to earn a higher income than, say, someone who hasn't gone through that sort of trauma. So now, whichever way you spin it, and even if you take the economics out of it, from a purely environmentalist perspective, a family that is intact, a two-parent family that is intact, sharing one household, they consume far less resources from an environmental perspective than a broken family does. All of a sudden, the carbon footprint, the resource footprint of a family that moves into two separate dwellings increases. So if you care about the environment, you really should care about marriage or keeping families intact. And the best way to do that, really, according to the research, is to get people who are committed to each other and making that lifelong commitment, and then who are supported and are nurtured to do that. This really isn't rocket science, so I just don't understand why people have freaked out and made out like that Family First is somehow proposing some weird, out-there conspiracy theory, or as if this is something new. It's not. This is not discrimination. This is just basic factual economics and mathematics. It's what it is. These facts don't discriminate. They just are. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow in the Daily.